So I'm going to jump back to the editor here, and I'm going to scroll up to the top of the test.php file. So if we scroll down this page slowly, you'd see that we have a lot of code, more code than in any of our previous examples so far. It says it has 169 lines in it. Now it may feel a little overwhelming at first, but just keep in mind that as you learn more about what the different parts do, that it will start to become clear, and 169 lines will start to feel manageable. One good technique to use first that we used in previous videos is grouping the code into sections to get a sense of the different parts of it, and we can do that usually at a glance. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll up to the top again. So at the very top we have a section of comments, which is simply a map of our land. You see there's 4 different places you can go. And then we have a little initialization code going on here. Following that is a set of functions. So we have one function here, one function here, and if we scroll down, we'll see another function right here, another one here, another one here. Let's scroll down a little bit more, and that's where it ends. This next group here looks like we're just setting some data. And if we scroll down, you'll see that that kind of extends for a while. After the data ends, then we have some processing that's going on, probably as a result of submitting forms. And if we scroll down a little bit more, we'll see some HTML, and this is likely our interface. So even though this might seem kind of long right now, it can be grouped into sections and we can look at each one of those individually. Just like in our previous example, let's go ahead and work through this code as we would if we were PHP. So we have the opening PHP tag here, we have some comments we can skip, and then we're running a function called start adventure session. Let's go ahead and take a look at what the code is in this function. It's actually right here. So in this function, we're starting a session, just like we did in our previous examples with the forms, just like we did in a couple of our previous examples, and then we're checking to see if the location session variable is set. If it's not, then we're going to set it. So the idea here is that we're kind of initializing the original location of the adventurer in our text adventure game. We're going to start off the location to be the house, and we're going to start off an inventory variable that's going to be an empty array. So now in general, when we use variables inside of a function, those variables are only valid within the scope of the function. So that is, if we try to access those variables outside of the function, we won't be able to. But there are some variables called global variables which are accessible anywhere, and the session variable is one of those. The get variable, post variable, and request variables that we've explored as well are also global. And pretty soon we'll look at the global keyword, which will allow us to make any variable global. And there are some implications to that we need to explore. Okay, so after we've run through this code, we have a session started and the session has a couple of variables in it. And then we're initializing a couple of variables here, a data variable and a log array variable. So the data variable is where we're going to store information about our world and what commands we can run in it. And the log array is where we're going to store information that we're going to print inside of the terminal screen. So if we go back to the browser, that's this section right here. I'm going to jump back to the code. And so now we have a set of function declarations which we can skip because they're not being run yet. But let's go ahead and read the names of the functions just so we get a sense of what we might have to work with. So we have a function called run command, and it takes a command as a parameter. So this probably does something when we input something into the form and submit it. This probably takes that data and does something with it. Let's go ahead and scroll down to the next function. The next one is called log standard text. So maybe this has something to do with displaying information in the output. Next we have a function called move to. This probably has something to do with shifting our character to some other place on the map. I'm going to go ahead and scroll down. We have a pickup function, and this probably has something to do with when we picked up that fishing pole, doing something like adding it to our inventory. And now here's the end of the functions. So this data, we're going to take a look at. I'm going to scroll down a little bit more. Now this section here, it looks like where we're setting a bunch of data. So first we have standard text, and the comment says standard text that might be used in multiple places. Centralizing this makes it easier to change. So the idea in a text adventure game is that sometimes you'll be typing something and it doesn't matter where you are on the map, it will always result in the same text being displayed to you. So this is just a collection of that different text. So one of them is there's nothing of importance here, move along. And that's if, for example, somebody types in look, but there isn't any information to show them. Or don't do that, what would your mother think? And this is doing something that's maybe antisocial behavior in the game or something. and so on. We have ouch that hurt and sorry you can't do that. So we can work with all of these and extend this later on if we want. This next variable called data is where we're storing information about the locations. We have two major parts of the information that we're storing here: the description of the location and what commands you can run in that location. So for example, in our house location, it says you're in a house, there's a door to the east and a window to the south. And the structure of this data is a multi-dimensional array. So we initialize this data array at the very top of our file, and every key in this data array is going to correspond to a different location. The data associated with this key is an array itself, and while there are two major sections, the commands array is also an array. So we have an array within another array. So the reason why we're not defining all of this data in a single array declaration is because it's a little bit easier to read when we have different sections here for a multi-dimensional array that has that many levels. So instead of saying data equals array and then associating the house key with all of this data and then the yard key with all of its data, we're instead using the syntax data opening bracket house closing bracket equals array. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the commands. So the commands item is an array, and it contains a list of things that can be typed in the form and what the resulting action will be in PHP. So if we type in east, it's going to cause this function move2 to run, and it's going to pass the value yard. Now, one question that may be coming up for you right now, or should be, is how do you get this to execute? This is actually just a string. So how do you make that execute as PHP? And the way we can do that is with a function called a val, which we'll get to in a little bit. So let's take a quick look at the rest of these commands just to get a sense of what's going on here. We can type south, and that will run the move2 function as well, but it will take us to the garden instead of the yard. We can type look, in which case we're going to take an array called log array and add an item to it. And what we're doing here is doing a ternary operator in order to determine what to display. The reason we can't just use one description is because for this place, the house, there's a fishing pole in there. And if we look and the fishing pole hasn't been picked up yet, we're going to see the fishing pole. If we've picked up the fishing pole, then we're not going to see it. So what we're going to do is check to see if the fishing pole is in the inventory session array. And if it is, we're going to return the standard text for nothing because the fishing pole isn't there to see. But if this condition returns false because it's not in the inventory, we'll add, hey, there's a fishing pole on the ground to the log array. The next item we can type is pickup fishing pole, in which case we'll execute the pickup function and we'll pass it fishing pole. And the final thing we can do is type jump, and it will run the log standard text function and it will pass the value of pane. Now you may remember pane from up here in our standard text. Now we'll explore these functions a little bit more when we actually run them. For now, what we're doing is just setting up this data inside of the data variable. After the house, we add a yard item, and we have a description, and the commands we can run here are moving west, south, and to climb. And when we climb, we're going to add an item to the log array that says, you climb the tree, the view is stunning, you climb back down. We have an item for the garden, where we can type north, east, or smell. If we type smell, we're going to add an item to the log array that says the flowers are dark and wonderful. You get pollen on your nose, but you don't know it. And let's go ahead and scroll down. And then there's one more item for the pond. And the commands we can use are west, north, and use fishing pole. Now what happens when use fishing pole is typed depends on whether you actually have a fishing pole in your inventory. And so there's some code here to deal with that we'll explore in a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and scroll down a bit more to reveal the rest of the code. So now we have a bunch of data, we have our standard text, and we've initialized our session. Next, we're going to see if post command is set. Now this is the data that we inputted into the form that says look or south or north. But because there's nothing here the first time the page is loaded, then we're going to go ahead and skip this. And the next thing we're going to do is check to see if we have any items added to the log array. So in various commands for these different pieces of data that correspond to locations, we saw that we added items to the log array. The first time that this runs, the log array will be empty. And what we want to do if there's no log entries to display is to display the description of the location where the user currently is. So the count here will result in 0, which is less than 1. And so we'll add an item to the log array. And to get the description of where the user currently is, we're going to grab the location session variable and pass that as the key to the data variable Now again, we set all this data up here already, and then we're going to grab the description inside of that data array. So you're seeing a lot of square brackets here, but we're simply accessing an array within an array. But to get the key here, we need to grab an item in the session array. So at this point, the log array has the single item with the description of the current location. Now remember, at the very top of this file, if we scroll back up to the top, when we ran the start adventure session function, we set the location as house. So if we scroll down again to the data about the house here, we'll see that the description will say, you're in a house. There's a door to the east and a window to the south. I'm going to scroll back down again. So this log array will now have that description as the one item in the array. Next, we're going to render the log out using implode, just like we did in the previous video. So we'll take the log array and implode it with list item tags, and then wrap an unordered list around that. Again, because we only have one item here, it will just return a string with the value of that one item in the log array. And next, it looks like we're going to render the inventory list. So to start out, we're going to set the inventory to say you have nothing in your inventory. This is the default text. But if there's some items in the inventory, that is the count of the inventory in our session is bigger than 0, then we'll run this code. For now, we're going to skip that because we don't have any items in our inventory the first time that this is loaded. And finally, we're going to add a heading to the inventory text. So that's the end of our processing. Now we're at the last section, which is our interface. So we have a heading 1 tag that says a simple adventure. We have a div with some styling to make the screen look a little bit more like an Apple IIe, an internal div to add some padding, and then our form. Now notice our form is posting back to itself just like we have in all the other forms in our examples, and we're using the post method. There's only one text input here, and the name of it is command. Remember that we checked for the post command here in order to run a command, but we didn't have anything yet. And then finally, we're going to hit submit. So notice that this is one example where populating the input with our command isn't necessarily going to be useful. So in previous videos, when somebody inputted something into a text input and submitted the form, it would grab that value and put it back into the input so the user could manipulate it. But this is a really good example of where we don't want to do that, because the user submits a command and then you know that they're going to submit a different command, or with a different meaning at least, the next time the form is loaded. So we go ahead and end our form, we end our padding div, and then we have a new div where we print our log, which the first time we run this will just include that single item with the description for the house, and our inventory, which will include the default empty text. Okay, so let's go ahead and go back to the browser and let's reset this. There's a command that we can do to do that, and we'll explore what happens when we do that a little later. But I'm going to type in reset and click do it. This will clear out our session altogether and start us from square one.